What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Kevin Prolix TV. Boy, do I got one for you. Spooky time. My childhood friend living in his dad's attic brought life to his love doll, and now he was found dead. We don't know where his doll is. What? Anyway, Andy was that 30-something guy in your hometown that never had a girlfriend, never moved out of his parents' place, and worked the same burger flipping job since high school. I was friends with him since elementary, given our interest in creating art, as well as TV cartoons and anime. My first memory of Andy was seeing him alone in the school parking lot a few hours after school closed. Coming from Pee Wee football from field next day, I asked him what he was doing here. "I'm just waiting for my parents to pick me up," he said, as if he was on the brink of tears. "Were you here since school ended?" I was too young to understand or be really concerned. If anything, I was probably just purely curious. "They're just a little late. They do that sometimes." Andy sat on a stone bench with the name to some administrator or something, facing away from me, going through his backpack, digging out a notebook filled with sketches of Crash Bandicoot, Solid Snake, and zombies. The drawings themselves were really good, considering we were both 8 at the time. I asked him if he had a PS1, to which he said, "Yeah, well, it's my older brother's. I watch him play it a lot." I was so jealous at the time, given how my parents only let me play my sister's old Atari. Given my parents were about to show up any minute to pick me up, I asked him if he wanted my parents to drop him off at his place so we could play PS1. He hesitated and said, "It's really messy. Is it okay if I come over to your place and hang out for a while? A bit before I call my parents?" I said, "Sure." We went to my house and watched Cartoon Network and played Missile Commando on my Atari. Well, he was a very talented artist and had a quirky sense of humor that leaned heavily on references to the Tim and Eric show. When I finally visited his house a few years later, I understood why he was so self-conscious about his home life. "You should probably keep your shoes on," he told me, as he opened the paint-chipped door to the worn-down 3-story home slowly engulfed by grass and trees. Inside the home, a dirt-covered Labrador dog ran up to me while a pit bull tried to nose its way outside. "Shut the door, damn it!" A 400-pound man nestled on a lazy boy shouted out at me and Andy. "That's my dad," Andy said as a casual whisper as he quickly pulled the dogs away and shut the door. The home itself was bordering on a hoarder territory. It was clean enough to walk through and sit down, but had weird piles of things like DVD cases and broken window AC units piled up. Andy and I played games like Soul Reaver and Max Payne on his brother's PS2, which he got from working at the McDonald's a few miles away. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms in total, but one was full of mom's sewing materials and his dad's weightlifting equipment, both covered in dust. The only accompanying room making Andy and his older brother share a room. Andy's older brother Eric, as well as Andy a few years behind, worked at the local McDonald's a few miles down from their house. He would speak to Andy often in grunts or questions regarding his stuff. Eric would go into the military right after high school. Andy's mom I rarely saw because of her regular hospital stays due to cancer and would pass away around the time Andy was 15. I never saw Andy really cry or get sad about his mom's death. He would regard her as a shadow of something he never really saw. Andy's dad was someone who I wouldn't necessarily call abusive, but always did the bare minimum in terms of parenting. When I moved out of that small town for college, Andy would continue working the local McDonald's while only living with his dad in that rotting house. After that pandemic, I lost my job and lost my apartment. I moved back home for a bit with my parents. Andy was one of the few people I liked from high school who still lived in town. After getting in contact with him, I found out he still lived with his dad in that house. When I visited his house, it was barely visible behind the vines and grass that swallowed it. His dad was now 500 pounds with true hoarder syndrome and a nest of food containers that surrounded him. The dog somehow still alive, but barely had enough energy to get up to the arrival of guests. Andy was rail thin, greasy, and looked 50 at the age of 32. He moved to the attic of his dad's house due to the accompanying garbage that now filled his room. The attic was filled with sketches and oil paintings of lewd depictions of anime girls, catwomen, and other things of a sexual nature, all while reeking of an odor of a certain nature. Andy, besides from me being his friend, was always a loner. He had his crushes, but for some reason or another, he couldn't ever get into a serious relationship. Still, this scene took me aback a bit. How lonely had Andy become after high school? He has been working at the local McDonald's for over 15 years now, only to what? Come home and draw porn and basically play video games? To be fair, the drawings themselves were really good in a certain artistic quality. He could pursue a career in that if he tried. Andy seemed excited to show me something he called his magnum opus, his Aphrodite doll. He opened up his crawl space and showed me something so uncanny. It was a life-size doll connected by screws and heat-dried clay. Parts of it had synthetic skin quality to it. It was dressed in blue tube top and a black skirt, accentuating some of its more feminine qualities. You made a sex doll? Are you keeping it in your crawl space? Okay. Just as I was about to continue and tell him how creepy it was, it got up on its own, and its puppet eyes opened and closed separately. The way its torso and arms swayed back and forth suggested it was very bottom heavy, with its feet being soldered weight plates. As it wheeled toward Andy, I saw its back covered in wires and computer boards. Isn't it amazing? It's truly something every guy wishes for. As he swung his arms around the robot's waist, bringing it closer, its arms swinging limply for a moment before grabbing Andy's hip with one arm and rubbing his chest with the other. The whole action suggested it was slowly registering the movements of Andy and replying appropriately to the action. Well, I don't know. Are you planning on selling this to some company or something? I didn't know whether to laugh or gasp in terror and disgust. I guess in the end, all I cared about was Andy's well-being. I don't know. It took me a while to get the AI right. Although the skeleton and muscles and skin synthetics were easy to come by in comparison, to be honest, I never really thought about selling it. He carefully reached to the back of its head, brushing off the hair sewn into its head, flickering some switches before it slowly crouched into the fetal position. Look, I'm going to be honest with you, Andy. This is pretty weird. I don't like you living here still. Have you ever tried going out of the country? Have you ever had a relationship with anyone else besides family? I came off sounding more frustrated than concerned, which must have sent Andy aback. Before I could let him reply, I quickly said, look, it's just, I care about you, man. You're a talented guy. You can move to a better place than here. And you can impress real women if you just talk to people. He frowned and rolled his Aphrodite doll back into the crawl space in a rather hastily manner that suggested he was embarrassed in ever showing it. Yeah, okay. He was clearly frustrated, and I didn't want to upset him. I'm not saying it's bad. It takes a lot of skill to make that. It's just, I'm worried about you, is all. He covered his mouth with a hand, dragging it down across the stubble of his chin in a motion of exhaustion. I think you should leave. I looked around in his filth and squalor with his absent father, who probably stopped caring long ago, 2 floors down. I didn't want to push too much on Andy right there. I told myself I would invite him out of his home over time and get him to use the outside world while not completely throwing away his talents. All right, but I want you to take my number. Feel free to call me anytime. I left the house that nature was slowly swallowing. I would get caught in the momentum of life. I would work in a warehouse an hour's drive away. I would meet my now current wife, who would give me my son. Unfortunately, I wouldn't have the time to call Andy, and he nor me. I wouldn't know how he turned out until I got a call from the police department at my hometown. The police had told me that Andy was found dead in his room in the attic, starved and head crushed with exceptional force, as well as having been sexually assaulted in a manner which the detectives had wanted to remain hidden for the investigation. The reason why they were talking to me was because, according to Andy's phone and social media records, I was the last person Andy talked to before his disappearance. Have you talked to his father? I asked the detective. She sighed. Well, that's the thing. His father was killed by head trauma. 2 dogs also found in the home. One crushed to death and the other by starvation. Well, we're just calling you to get a clearer picture. I told her everything. The squalor, the drawings, the doll. She seemed confused and frustrated by the mention of the doll, as if I was a child making up a story for attention. I asked her, well, it should be in the crawl space in the attic. Did you look there? No, we didn't find anything. It could have been just one of those things he ordered online and threw out later. She asked if I knew anything else before, to which I said no, before we both ended the call to our thank yous and let me know if anything would come up. I wish there was a definitive end to the story, but even I don't believe the reports that it was some family dispute gone wrong according to the police reports. I wish I could go to the house to see if they missed anything, but after the investigation ended, they had condemned the house and bulldozed it to the ground. I did get to call Eric, Andy's older brother, in the military. He had been given a sketchbook by Andy. He admitted that him and Andy were never close and that I should have the sketchbook since I was his only friend. The sketchbook, amazingly, was the one I saw Andy with the first day I met him. Faded drawings of Crash Bandicoot, Solid Snake, and zombies. It was also stuffed with folded pieces of paper and a graph paper with newer writings. Some of them looked familiar, one of which was schematics of the Aphrodite doll, as well as another schematic dated Aphrodite dolls version 2, 3, and 4, dated just days after the last time I saw Andy. End. Oh, man. Wow. If you're still here, thank you. This has been another episode of Kevin Prolich TV. Thank you for joining me on the Spooky Hour, and I'll catch you on the next one.